the ASEAN, Asia, Southeast Asia regional scam centre crisis, we're calling that. It's not really that fair. There are scam centres popping up in many other parts of the world, but there's a particular problem or phenomena around Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos. And if we dig into it, I mean, it's primarily involving multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that's operating at what they call a sovereign scale. They're not just rooms full of laptops, they're often massive fortified compounds, some located in special economic zones where local law enforcement has little to no jurisdiction. The business model, famously known as, well, I'm not even going to say the word, they call it pig butchering, which is like fattening up pigs for sale. This is a term that I find quite offensive.
Yeah.
Emily, do you want to talk about that?
In the kind of expert communities that work on scam and fraud, they don't like the terminology because it really objectifies the victims, and it also suggests a sort of dehumanisation and a kind of, it feels like not a game but also just very graphic. I don't like it
Well,
at
I think
all.
it's also the butchers themselves laughing at the victims and thinking of the victim as like a pig under Shah Zhu Pan is the actual phrase, involving, fattening up a pig before slaughtering it. I find that offensive because what's really happening is the fraudster or scammer is building a long-term relationship or professional trust with victims before, quote, slaughtering them by draining their life savings.
Yeah. And it feels so calculating, doesn't
Yes,
it? Well,
it does.
it is so calculating, and I think we've all, we've certainly got family members who have been through that horrible experience and are going through that experience. And it's a very one-to-one deep relationship that is established. And Alice has been doing quite a lot of research in that area, looking at the tactics of scam centre operatives.
Alice, give us a little bit of background here. What is a scam centre? Presumably it's a place that's just full of evil people that have been gathered together and are just hyper-scaling this activity. Just explain to me in simple terms.
Very sadly, that is not the reality. So in 2026, we're looking no longer at fraud as something that's done kind of one-to-one through a cold call or on a doorstep. We now face industrialised fraud. And industrialised fraud primarily involves all the types of human rights abuses that exist. It's a very human trafficking and modern slavery-based institution, I would say, where most scammers, firstly, don't even realise that what they're doing is scamming, that it's unethical. They're told, they're trafficked across borders to scam compounds where they're kept in sort of, I've seen lots of pictures. They look almost like a kind of university accommodation. They're huge as well, but they're not nice. People are, forced to work. They're forced to meet daily quotas of scamming people. They're told that the victims are clients who they are convincing to invest money in things like cryptocurrency. So they are presented with totally false information about what they're doing. And actually the people that are enforcing that they meet these quotas and that end up torturing them if they don't meet the quotas, they are also trafficking victims themselves. They are part of the same, group of people.
So, Emily, my question to Alice was rhetorical, and before we come on to what they actually do, and I know that you've been talking actually literally to people who have been brought into those, so my question to you at the beginning was rhetorical. What makes this crisis, I think you could call it, sort of horrific, is what we call the double victim nature of this. People, people sending it, as Alice was saying, are often the victims themselves, thousands of individuals from across the globe, including from Vietnam, China, but also European victims as well, who are responding to fake job adverts, and we'll talk about how those fake assets that they're responding to are generated later on for high-paying tech roles. We're hearing that upon their arrival, their passports are confiscated, so they've got digital identity that matters to the real scammers who are arranging this, and forced into labour under a threat of torture or resale to worse compounds. This is pernicious, isn't it?
It's horrendous. And there was a UN Office of Drugs and Crime Global Fraud Summit in the middle of March that we all attended, and there was testimony there from somebody who had escaped from a scam compound. Alice talked to that person as well. But when you hear these stories and see the images of what they're enduring, it really brings home that this is a multi-victim organised crime event. It's become embedded in societies. And one of the talks I really remember attending from an officer from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime was, particularly talking about the situation in the ASEAN region, is that for some of the country, this is an extremely diverse region in terms of the economies. You've got Singapore, which is a huge global powerhouse and a very strong leader in digitisation, to countries like Cambodia and Laos, which have many economic challenges. And actually, for some of the countries in that region, the contribution to GDP from scams and fraud is really significant. And so, and as a job, as a way of earning money, this is a big draw. So there are people who are trafficked, there are people who are choosing it. And, one of the things that I've been looking into is, what does the data from the Global Signal Exchange tell us about the digital footprint of those physical scam centres? And it's quite a surprising picture.
What does it say?
It says that there's really a decoupling. So you've got the physical placement of scam compounds, often in very remote areas, in the jungle, in areas where they might be special economic zones, that there is sort of limited powers that the local policing have. So they're sort of like quite safe physically. But, what do we know or think? If you think about remote regions sometimes in developing countries or developing economies, the first thing you're thinking about as a tech person is like, I bet the connectivity is a bit rubbish, and it is. So what we see in the Global Signal Exchange is a decoupling of that physical, geographical presence from the digital footprint. And so Singapore is a really interesting example. So you've got a very wealthy population, you've got great digital infrastructure, and what the abuse reports are from the GSE are heavily tied to cloud providers like Alibaba, to Cloudflare. So that doesn't denote any wrongdoing on their part. It's just a very logical, rational business decision to use your local providers to get online, and then use these huge global powerhouse providers to ensure that you have great connectivity.
I'm going to come back to that in our second topic, which is how this is all facilitated and the infrastructure that supplies that. Sticking to the ASEAN region and these scam compounds, Alice, I know that you've been talking to one of them particularly. You've had the privilege of talking to one of them who was captured and put into a scam compound. I want to emphasise that these compounds are not just in the ASEAN region. We've heard of a case involving the London Police Services, and through the Global Signal Exchange being able to identify scam compound in the West Africa region. But we're focusing on the ASEAN region because we're going there and we want to talk about it, and so we've been looking at it. But Alice, what's the day in the life of a scam compound captive who's actually been recruited into slave labour? When I say do they get up in the morning, do they get up in the morning? I mean, a lot of their targets are on the other side of the world, aren't they?
Well, it was really interesting, speaking to Salam and hearing him speak at
Salam.
Salam is a survivor of human trafficking, and he was in a scam compound. And he sent me his sort of written account of his experiences, and and it was striking how much geography plays such a significant role in, a specific scam compound will target a specific country, victims in a specific country. And so his working hours would be from sort of 10 p.m. for him in Cambodia. And they start out, everything's very lovely, it's very deceptive. They are promised, a well-paying job. It's through word of mouth personal connections of like a friend who I went to school with says he's got this great job in Cambodia, which I think any of us would, if we were struggling to provide for a family, would take up. And initially, they're given these sort of like very reasonable sounding working hours. Obviously it's through the night, but with good breaks. And then they're given quotas. So it's in some compounds they use what we're calling a scattergun technique, which is as many people as possible with a very surface level, just get money from them quickly. So he personally would maybe be targeting 30 people a day. And if he failed to get them to invest, there would be physical punishments. They would have to do extra work for each, person that they failed to get to invest. And then everything escalated. So eventually they end up working with no breaks. There's torture. There's people who would get put in solitary confinement just as a punishment for even asking to go home, to go and see like a dying relative or something. So it's really horrendous what happens in scam compounds.
So you've got this social drive of needing good work. You've almost got an economy, and we've been hearing that in some of these compounds they have board meetings, they do training courses, your food is provided, your accommodation, and so you've got this sort of toxic mix. And then we'll move on a bit later to how all of that is facilitated and whether in the non-ASEAN regions there is actually some part to play in what's happening here. Thanks very much.